Leone had always been different from the rest of the people in Frostfall Valley. Where others spoke with sharp tones and colder expressions, she carried a gentleness that warmed even the bitter morning air. At 22, she moved through the icy mountain village with a softness that felt almost foreign, as if she were a warm breath of wind wandering through a land that had forgotten what warmth felt like. Her hands were always ready to help, her voice always calm, and her eyes held a light that never dimmed, even when the winter winds bit at her skin. Yet, in a place where emotions were treated as weakness and compassion was mocked, Leone's warmth made her stand out in ways that isolated her more than she understood. The people of Frostfall believed that strength came only from hardness. They measured worth by how cold someone could become, how easily they could suppress fear, sadness, joy, or love. Any sign of feeling was seen as a crack in the armor, a dangerous flaw in a land where the cold ruled everything. But Leone's heart had never obeyed those rules. She laughed easily, cried when others were hurt, and listened deeply when no one else bothered to. Even when the mountain winds howled through the village, she carried a small, stubborn glow inside her chest, a warmth that refused to die. To her, kindness was not weakness, it was survival. But the village didn't see it that way. They watched her from a distance, whispering as she walked past. Sometimes people muttered under their breath, shaking their heads at her softness. Too tender, they would say. Too open. Children stared at her with confusion, not understanding why someone would smile so easily. Adults looked at her with suspicion, wondering why she refused to bury her emotions like everyone else. When she stopped to help a struggling neighbor, they recoiled as if her touch carried heat that could burn. Leone never complained, but she felt the sting of their rejection more deeply than she let on. Still, she continued trying, because trying was all she knew. Every morning, she walked through the village carrying baskets of herbs she gathered from the warm spring hidden behind her home, one of the few places untouched by the freezing winds. She gave them to elders whose bones ached in the cold or to mothers whose children shivered at night. Even when people turned away, she would leave bundles at their doors. She believed, with all her heart, that warmth spread best without being asked for. And though no one thanked her, she continued, convinced that her presence mattered, even in small ways. Yet deep inside, Leone often wondered if her heart was simply too soft for the world she lived in. She questioned why she felt everything so intensely, why she hurt when others hurt, why she loved beauty in a land that dismissed it, why she carried hope in a place that crushed it out of its children. But she also knew this was who she was. Her warmth was not something she could turn off, not something she wanted to bury. It was the only true strength she possessed, the only part of herself that made her feel alive in a world frozen by fear. Despite the whispers, despite the cold glances and sharp words, Leone held her head high each day. Her spirit had a quiet resilience, a steady glow that even the harshest winds could not extinguish. She did not yet know that the warmth inside her would one day become the valley's salvation, or that the very heart they mocked would carry a power greater than any frozen throne. For now she simply walked, gentle and glowing, a warm flame in a world of ice. The morning begins like any other, mist rolling down the icy cliffs, villagers moving stiffly through the frost, but something feels wrong. Whispers follow Leone wherever she walks. Eyes avoid hers, not with the usual annoyance but with fear. Even the children she helps every day don't run to her like they used to. By midday, the cold seems to thicken around her, as if the mountain itself is holding its breath. The council of elders, known for their stone-like faces and rigid hearts, gather in the village square. Their furs are heavy, their staffs carved with symbols of endurance and severity. They look at Leone the same way they look at a crack in the ice, something dangerous, something that must be fixed. For years the elders tolerated her. They allowed her to exist as an oddity, a harmless girl whose warmth softened no one but herself. But things changed when people started listening to her. When tired mothers found comfort in her words. When grieving hunters found strength in her compassion. When children cried into her shoulder and rose feeling lighter. Her presence was beginning to melt something the council worked generations to keep frozen: human emotion. To the elders this was rebellion. They accuse her of weakening the village traditions, of disturbing the order built on silence, strength, and emotional stillness. Leone tries to defend herself, her voice trembling but steady, but the elders don't want explanations. They want control. They declare her too warm, a danger to the mountain's way of life. Before she can react, cold hands seize her. Villagers look away, pretending they cannot see the injustice. Only a few cry silently, but their tears freeze on their faces before they hit the ground. Leone is dragged through the snow, her feet leaving soft, warm depressions that refuse to freeze instantly, a sign of her spirit, a sign that terrifies the elders even more. The frozen keep awaits her. It is a towering structure carved into the side of the highest cliff, a prison where breath becomes frost and emotions are buried under ice. No one leaves the keep with their heart intact. Many never leave at all. As the heavy doors of the keep creak open, a wave of cold crashes into her, a cold so sharp it feels like knives against her skin. The elders push her inside. The last thing she sees before the door slams shut is the village that mocked her, now watching with a hint of regret too late to matter. Inside the frozen keep, the walls glow with an unnatural blue. Every breath she takes turns white instantly. The cold creeps into her clothes, into her bones, into her soul. The elders believe this place will freeze her heart completely. But Lena, shivering and alone, whispers a promise to herself. They may freeze the world around me, but they will not freeze me. The door of the frozen keep shuts behind Lena with a sound like a mountain collapsing. The echo of it rolls through the halls, sealing her fate. She stands alone in a corridor carved from solid ice, cold mist rising in slow, ghost-like trails. Her breath turns white instantly. Her eyelashes frost over within seconds. A guard orders her to remove her shoes. When she steps forward barefoot, the shock hits her like fire, except it's the fire of deep cold, the kind that burns as it freezes. Every step feels like walking on shattered glass. The ice beneath her feet is so clear she can see her reflection, trembling, staring back at her through a thin layer of frost. They march her through the keep. Every room she passes holds echoes of forgotten souls, prisoners who once cried, once hoped, once loved before the cold hollowed them out. Their scratches on the walls, their faint carvings, their last attempts to hold on to warmth, all preserved in the eternal chill. They finally lock her in a stone room colder than the outside winter. No blanket. No fire. Just a slab of frozen rock to sit on. The walls glisten with trapped frost, sparkling like a cruel mockery of stars. Then the punishment begins. They force her to spend hours in total silence, expected to sit perfectly still. Any movement earns a blast of icy air from vents hidden in the walls. The cold is their weapon, not just physical but emotional. It whispers to her. It claws at her. It wants to numb her until she feels nothing at all. The elders visit her daily, each time with a new method meant to freeze her heart. One elder sits before her and mocks her kindness. You care too deeply. That is your weakness. Another bangs his staff against the floor, shouting that empathy is poison. You heal people who must learn to be strong. A third stands so close she can see frost clinging to his beard. Warmth destroys order. We will carve it out of you. They isolate her, refusing to speak to her unless it is to break her spirit. They forbid her from hearing voices other than theirs. They let her sleep only when exhaustion crushes her body. They extinguish every light so she lives in a cold blue darkness that seeps into her bones. They think the cold is winning. But it isn't. Because Lena does something none of them expect. She remembers. She remembers the little boy whose hands she warmed after he fell into the snow. She remembers the old widower who cried into her shoulder after losing his wife. She remembers the mother who hugged her and whispered, "Your heart saved me." She remembers every soul she touched, and every soul that touched her. And those memories burn quietly inside her. On the third night, when the keep feels colder than death, Lena presses her hand against her chest. Her fingers are trembling, her skin numb, her lips nearly blue, but deep inside she feels something the cold cannot reach. A gentle heat. Not from anger. Not from defiance. But from love, the kind the village tried to kill. The more she remembers, the stronger that warmth grows. Even the guards notice it. When they open her door, the frost on the floor near her melts ever so slightly, only to freeze again seconds later. But they see it. They whisper to the elders that something is wrong with her, or rather something is too right. Because in a place where hearts turn to ice, Lena's refuses to die. On the seventh night in the frozen keep, Lena lies curled on the cold stone, her breath a thin mist fading into the darkness. The silence around her is absolute. Even the guards' footsteps have vanished. Even the distant wind outside seems to have stopped. It is a silence so heavy it feels alive. She closes her eyes, trying to summon memories of warmth again, but exhaustion drags her under. Her heartbeat slows. Her body trembles uncontrollably. Her fingers feel like stone. Then, something shifts. A soft vibration pulses through the ground beneath her cheek. At first she thinks it is her imagination. Then it comes again, faint but steady, like a distant drumbeat buried under layers of frozen earth. She lifts her head. The cold bites instantly, but she ignores it. The vibration turns into a hum. A melody, low, ancient, almost like a lullaby sung by the mountains themselves. The ice is singing. She presses her palm against the floor. The cold should be unbearable, but instead she feels warmth. Not physical heat, but something deeper, gentler, like a hand placed over hers from the other side of the world. Then the hum turns into a whisper. A voice, soft as falling snow, strong as the shifting earth beneath the mountain. You are not alone, child. Leone gasps softly. Her breath clouds the air. The voice continues, threading through the ice like liquid light. You carry a warmth older than this village, older than the elders' laws, older than the frozen keep itself. She presses her other hand onto the ice. The vibrations intensify, spreading like ripples beneath the surface. Who are you? She whispers, her voice hoarse from days of silence. The ice glows faintly under her palms, like blue fire trapped beneath the surface. I am the memory of what this place once was, the voice replies. Before they built their prison, before they tried to freeze what they feared. The hum deepens like a chorus of echoes singing through time. They fear warmth because warmth reveals truth. And you carry a heart they cannot break. Lena's eyes burn with tears she didn't know she had left. One tear slips down her cheek and falls onto the ice. Instead of freezing, it melts a tiny circle beneath her face. The voice grows warmer, more present. Your heart holds a power the elders cannot control. A power they tried to bury under stone and cold. But warmth, the voice says softly, always finds a way. The ice beneath her begins pulsing like a heartbeat, slow, powerful, ancient. For the first time since she entered the frozen keep, Leone doesn't feel alone. She feels seen, held, guided. She sits up straighter, her back no longer slouched with defeat. Why are you helping me? She asks. The hum rises, gentle as a hand brushing her hair. Because, little flame, the voice whispers, you are the one who must melt what they have built. The glow fades, but the warmth remains inside her. Lena's heart beats stronger than before. And the ice listens. Elder Kumo sat alone in the corner of the council chamber, his staff resting across his knees. Unlike the other elders, his eyes still held a flicker of something more, something the villagers had long stopped noticing: memory, warmth, and regret. Once, Kumo had been like Leone, a man who could laugh freely, who could comfort the grieving, who had felt the winds of the mountain and the pulse of life in every heart he encountered. But loss had hardened him. A frost had grown within his chest, filling the spaces once reserved for laughter and love. Years ago, his wife had died in the bitter winter storms. His children had grown distant, taught by the village's rigid ways to hide feeling, to suppress hope, to fear warmth. The grief he carried was solitary, internalized, and ultimately made him one of the council's most unyielding members. He had built walls around himself that even time could not erode. And yet, watching Leone, the girl with the warmth that radiated even in the face of the frozen keep, stirred something he had long buried. Kumo observed the council's preparations as they planned the ritual to crush Lena's heart completely. They spoke of order, of tradition, of the dangers of softness. They spoke of her influence as a threat, a destabilizing force in a village where hardness had become law. To Kumo it was painfully familiar. He had once feared warmth too. He had once crushed it within himself, believing it weak and dangerous. Now, watching the elders' actions, he realized they were not just punishing her. They were punishing what they could no longer control. Something shifted inside him as he watched the guards march Leone past the council chamber, her bare feet leaving tiny depressions in the frost. The echoes of her steps reminded him of a time when his own heart had not been frozen, when he had laughed with his children in the snow and felt the warmth of connection with others. Lena's courage and resilience made him uncomfortable, not because of her power, but because it exposed the hollow places in his own life. He saw in her what he had lost, and what the village had lost, because of fear and pride. After the council meeting ended, Kumo lingered in the empty hall. The chants and commands of the other elders faded behind him. His staff tapped gently against the icy floor, a rhythm that echoed like a heartbeat he had forgotten he still possessed. He thought of Leone in the frozen keep, alone yet unbroken. A small, stubborn hope rose within him, challenging decades of hardened fear. He questioned himself quietly, almost afraid of the truth. Had he truly believed that emotional suppression kept the village strong? Or had it only kept him safe from his own pain? Lena's spirit, alive and unyielding even under the coldest cruelty, forced him to confront the cracks in the system he had once defended without question. Kumo's gaze fell to the carvings on the wall, faded symbols etched by generations of elders, reminders of the power they wielded over the vulnerable. In those symbols, he recognized the echo of his own mistakes, and suddenly the fear the council had of Leone became clear. They feared not her kindness, not her warmth, not even her survival. They feared the truth she carried, the truth that their rigid coldness, their obsession with control, could be undone by a single human heart that refused to yield. As he left the council hall, Kumo paused outside the frozen keep, listening to the faint sounds of ice creaking and the distant hum he could not yet name. For the first time in decades he felt uncertain. Not weak, not frightened, but alive in a way that made his chest ache and his fingers tremble. Lena's heart, small but unbreakable, had begun to thaw something inside him. A recognition that the world they had built on fear and cold might not endure against the power of warmth. And for the first time, Elder Kumo wondered if perhaps it was not too late for him, or for the village, to feel again. The frozen keep shivered under the weight of the council's presence. The elders gathered around the central chamber, their furs brushing the icy floor, staffs gleaming with frost-encrusted runes. At the center of the room stood the ice stone, a monolith of pure, unyielding cold, carved to absorb warmth and crush life. Its surface shimmered with an unnatural light, pulsating in rhythm with the cold that had frozen countless hearts before. Today it would be Lena's turn. She was brought forward barefoot, chains of ice clinking around her wrists, her breath forming clouds that vanished instantly in the frigid air. The elders' faces were stern, carved with the authority of generations who had believed in control above compassion. "This is the way," they murmured to one another. "This is justice. This is preservation." Lena's chest rose and fell, each breath steady despite the chill that clawed at her skin. Her eyes did not falter. They were calm, glowing with a warmth that seemed almost impossible in a place built to erase it. The guards pushed her forward, forcing her hands onto the ice stone. The moment her fingers touched the surface, a strange tension rippled through the chamber. The cold recoiled as if startled, curling away from her touch. A low groan echoed from the stone itself, deep and resonant, as cracks began to spiderweb across its frozen face. The elders gasped, leaning closer, eyes wide. "This cannot be," one whispered. "It's meant to hold all life, to crush all hearts, and yet it fractures." The cracks grew, tiny at first, glimmering like frost catching the light of a hidden sun. Then larger, deeper, spreading across the ice stone like rivers of white fire. Lena's fingers barely pressed, yet the ice seemed to pulse with the rhythm of her own heartbeat, responding to the warmth that surged from her chest. A murmur ran through the council, disbelief, fear, a hint of awe. Elder Kumo, standing slightly apart, felt it first, not just the ice fracturing but the truth of Lena's power. His eyes softened as he whispered under his breath, "Her heart, it is too alive." The other elders recoiled as if he had uttered blasphemy. "Impossible," they hissed. "It cannot survive. It is meant to destroy any warmth, any softness." But Lena did not flinch. She did not cry out. Her warmth was steady, unwavering, radiating from her very core. It was not anger, not rebellion, not defiance. It was simply life, flowing through her veins, refusing to be contained. The ice stone shuddered and groaned as if the building itself resented its failure. Tiny droplets of frozen water fell from the cracks, sizzling briefly as they touched the cold floor, turning into steam that carried a faint, almost musical hum. Lena's chains rattled, but they did not bind her heart. One of the younger guards, who had watched silently since the beginning, took a hesitant step forward. His voice trembled. She's not afraid. The ice, it's breaking because she is alive." "Yes," Kumo agreed quietly, watching the pattern of cracks spread wider. "Alive, and more powerful than we imagined." The elders' confidence faltered. Fear replaced authority. They had built their rituals to crush warmth, to suppress life, to enforce silence. And yet here it was, their stone monument of control fracturing before a single human heart. Lena withdrew her hands slightly, and the cracks widened further, spreading across the ice stone like a map of uncontainable energy. A low hum filled the chamber, vibrating through the floor, through the walls, through the very bones of everyone present. The cold that had defined this place for centuries recoiled entirely, leaving the chamber trembling in a strange mixture of frost and heat, fear and awe. And then, softly, almost as if carried by the ice itself, someone whispered again. "Her heart is too alive." The night in the frozen keep was quieter than ever. Even the whisper of the wind seemed to have frozen midair. Lena lay on the stone floor, curled into herself, shivering not from cold, but from the weight of isolation. Days had passed in near total silence, Her only company the cold and the walls that seemed to grow taller, more oppressive with each passing hour. She thought of her village, of the faces she had once touched with warmth, of the children she had comforted, now distant and unaware of her suffering. Loneliness pressed against her chest like a solid block of ice. She tried to breathe through it, tried to summon the small flame of courage she had carried since she arrived. But tonight the cold was heavier, the silence deeper. Her heart, though unyielding, ached with a raw human vulnerability she could no longer hide. And then, without warning, a single tear slipped from her eye. It fell slowly, almost in slow motion, glistening like a drop of sunlight caught in frost. It hit the frozen floor with a tiny, crystalline plink. But the plink was not just sound, it was a signal, a spark. Where it landed, the ice did not remain solid. Instead, it began to soften, a small circle of warmth spreading outward like the first hint of spring beneath snow. Lena stared, wide-eyed, as the tear continued its journey. The circle expanded rapidly, warmth creeping along the cracks that had already fractured the ice stone. She moved slightly, and the heat followed her fingertips, spreading through the floor like rivers of molten silver. Every breath she exhaled carried warmth, and the cold that had ruled the keep for generations recoiled in response. The walls themselves seemed to respond, groaning softly as frost peeled away and icicles drooped into puddles that steamed faintly in the cold air. A gentle vibration hummed through the stone, as if the keep itself were awakening, or perhaps trembling in fear of the power it had tried, and failed, to contain. The chains around her wrists, once tight and unyielding, began to loosen as the ice beneath them softened. She lifted her hands and watched in awe as the floor beneath shimmered and shifted, forming a path of warmth that stretched outward in every direction. Each step she took left a trace of life, a mark that the cold could not reclaim. Outside her door, the guards and even the elders could feel it. The chill in the corridors weakened, the air itself trembling with the strange pulse of warmth. Whispers ran through the frozen keep like wind through cracking glass, some fearful, some incredulous, all aware that the rules they had enforced for decades were dissolving under a single act of human emotion. Lena rose fully to her feet, trembling but alive. She followed the path her tear had created, watching the warmth snake along the floors, touching walls, melting frost, opening doors that had never been opened. She realized, with a mixture of astonishment and determination, that this was only the beginning. One small tear, shed from a heart unbroken, had begun to undo everything the elders had built. And as the heat spread, so too did Lena's resolve. She would walk this keep, this prison of ice and fear, and melt it entirely, not with force, but with the one power they could never contain, the warmth of her heart. The frozen keep, ancient and merciless, had begun to bend to her will. And Lena smiled faintly, knowing that the first step toward freedom had already been taken. The warmth spread slowly at first, almost imperceptibly, a quiet ripple beneath the frost that coated the frozen keep. Then it surged. The ice that had imprisoned Lena for so long began to respond, not violently but with a gentle shudder, as though awakening from a centuries-long slumber. Cracks widened in the frozen floors, droplets of water dripping from icicles and steaming in the cold air. Ancient runes etched into walls and ceilings began to glow faintly, pulsing in rhythm with the warmth that Lena carried. She stepped carefully along the newly melted path, her bare feet sinking into the softened stone. The chains that had bound her wrists clattered to the ground, no longer frozen tight. For the first time in years she felt the simple joy of movement unrestricted. Each step she took left traces of heat, trails that shimmered faintly like liquid gold, melting frost and illuminating the icy corridors with a soft glow. The air seemed alive now, humming with energy long suppressed. Whispered echoes drifted from the walls, ancient memories of those who had lived, loved, and perished in the keep. Spirits long trapped within the stone began to stir, shifting and swaying, drawn to the warmth that Lena carried. They did not frighten her. Instead, they recognized a force they had awaited for generations. She felt their presence, faint but comforting, like the brush of wind against her cheek or the faint heartbeat of the mountain itself. As Lena moved deeper into the keep, the elders, stationed in the upper chambers, felt the shift immediately. Frost that had clung stubbornly to their robes and staffs melted, leaving damp patches and a sense of unease that gnawed at their composure. They had built this stronghold to enforce control, to suppress emotion, to crush any warmth before it could challenge their authority. And now, it was failing. The first elder to speak, his voice shaking, barked orders that made no difference. Seal the corridors. Stop her. Contain the heat. But the corridors themselves had begun to resist. Ice cracked and shifted, floors buckled slightly, doors opened and closed on their own. It was as if the keep itself had become an accomplice to Lena's power. Lena continued her walk through the halls, her gaze steady, her heart beating like a drum of fire. She paused before the central chamber, the heart of the frozen keep, where the ice stone still lay fractured. Its cracks glowed brighter now, responding to the warmth that had seeped into every corner of the keep. The elders watched helplessly as their monument to control groaned and trembled, pieces of frost detaching and falling into puddles that hissed with the heat of her presence. "Her heart," whispered Elder Kumo, standing apart from the others, awe and fear mixing in his voice. "It is stronger than all we have built." The younger guards tried to retreat, but even the corridors they ran through pulsed with warmth, the ice beneath their feet melting into shallow pools. Their fear became palpable, a tangible heat that Lena could feel radiating around her, amplifying the power she already carried. With each step, the ancient runes glimmered brighter, responding to the combination of human warmth and long-suppressed magic. Shadows retreated, and the spirits of the keep whispered their approval, lending subtle guidance to her path. The elders' panic grew, their authority crumbling along with the ice. They shouted, waved staffs, and attempted rituals, but all were drowned out by the overwhelming, unstoppable power of a single heart that refused to be frozen. Lena's eyes shone with quiet triumph. The warmth she carried was not just survival, it was rebellion, renewal, and justice. She walked on, unchained, unstoppable, melting the walls and the centuries of fear they had enforced. The frozen keep, once a place of despair and silence, now vibrated with life, fire beneath the snow, ready to be reborn. The warmth that Lena carried through the frozen keep did not stop at the cold stone walls. It flowed outward, seeping into the mountain air, slipping through cracks in the rock, drifting silently toward the village below. The first signs were subtle. Frost that had clung stubbornly to rooftops softened, delicate ice sculptures crafted by the villagers' hands toppled into puddles, and the frozen earth of the fields began to yield moisture once more. At first, people thought it was simply a change in weather. But soon the effects were undeniable. Crops that had remained trapped beneath ice for decades began to sprout tiny shoots. Wells, long clogged with frost, released water that shimmered with unusual warmth. And then, something far stranger happened. People began to feel. The villagers who had spent their lives suppressing emotion were overwhelmed. Farmers paused in shock as waves of joy, sorrow, longing, and hope surged through them like a storm they could not resist. A woman walking through the market, her face usually stern and impassive, felt a sudden pang of guilt for every unkind word she had spoken to Lena. She gasped and placed her hands on her chest, tears forming in eyes that had long forgotten how to cry. Children were the first to express what the adults could not. They laughed without restraint, rolling in puddles of melting frost, squealing as they felt the warmth under their small fingers and toes. Some cried, releasing grief that had been locked inside for years, tears dripping onto the thawing ground and soaking into the soil. Mothers and fathers watched, startled and unprepared, unable to stop themselves from joining in. A laugh, hesitant at first, escaped a gruff elder's lips. It was as if the village itself was exhaling after holding its breath for decades. Walls cracked along the edges of houses built to resist the cold, bricks shifting as if the warmth demanded space. Ice that had formed into sharp, ornamental patterns along windows melted into dripping rivulets. The village square, once stiff and lifeless under layers of frost, was transformed into a place alive with sound, movement, and emotion. Whispers began circulating. "Do you feel it? I can hear laughter again. Did the mountain change?" No one could explain what was happening, yet they all sensed that something extraordinary had arrived. Fear and wonder blended together in strange harmony. The elders' rigid rules, the laws that had demanded suppression, began to crumble as the villagers felt the warmth within themselves, an echo of the fire Lena had carried through the keep. Even those who had once mocked kindness and tenderness found themselves pausing, touched by a sensation they could not name. The village, so long encased in cold and rigidity, shivered with life. For the first time in decades, the people realized that the world could be felt, not just endured. And high above them, in the fading light of the mountain, the faint shimmer of a path of warmth spread through the village like a river of sunlight, invisible but undeniable. Lena's courage, her tears, and her heart had reached every corner of the village, shaking the foundations of an entire way of life. Something forbidden had returned to the valley, the full, unrestrained power of emotion. The council chamber, once a bastion of frozen authority, trembled under the power Lena now carried. The elders had gathered again, hoping their combined magic, rituals, and centuries of hardened tradition could suppress the warmth that had spread from the frozen keep to the village below. They had failed before, but they believed experience and numbers could finally crush her spirit. Leone stepped forward, bare feet pressing into the melting floor. Each step left a trail of warmth that shimmered like molten gold against the icy remnants of the chamber. Her chest rose steadily, breaths calm and measured, radiating power that the elders could see but could not comprehend. She did not shout. She did not demand. She simply stood, alive, radiant, and unyielding. The eldest of the council raised his staff, its tip crackling with frozen energy, and chanted the ancient words meant to bind her heart. Frost exploded from the staff like shards of shattered glass, rushing toward Leone in a furious storm. But as the cold struck her, it recoiled, unable to touch her warmth. The air around her shimmered, bending the frost into spirals that dissolved before they could land. "You think your fear can bind me?" Leone's voice, calm and steady, echoed through the chamber. She had not spoken for days, yet her presence alone carried authority. The words were small, but each one burned like fire, piercing through the walls, the ice, and the cold hearts before her. The elders tried again, chanting louder, combining their powers in a desperate effort to reclaim control. Frost surged, the very walls of the chamber quivering, icicles snapping under the strain. But Leone did not move. She did not flinch. Her heart, alive and pure, expanded with each second, radiating warmth that grew stronger with every attempt to suppress it. One by one their powers faltered. The frost that had clung stubbornly to their robes melted, dripping onto the stone floor. Their chants faltered, their staffs shaking as they realized the truth. Leone was no longer a prisoner. She had become a force they could not command, a living flame in a world built on ice. Elder Kumo, standing slightly apart, watched with awe. He could feel the energy surging around her, a warmth that touched even his frozen heart. For the first time in decades, he understood the true power of compassion, resilience, and courage. He whispered almost to himself, "She carries what we abandoned, what we feared, what we cannot stop." The eldest elder screamed, summoning a final wave of cold to crush her. Leone closed her eyes for a brief moment. When she opened them, the warmth around her had intensified, brightening like the sun breaking through a storm. The cold that once defined the council's authority shattered instantly, leaving the elders staggered, their power broken. Her heart became a visible force, a radiance that pulsed outward. The chamber walls cracked and groaned, ice melting into flowing streams that spread warmth to every corner. The elders fell to their knees, helpless before the sheer force of life Leone embodied. Their authority, built on fear and control, had no ground to stand on. For the first time, the council understood a truth they had long ignored. No amount of cold could contain a heart that refused to freeze. Leone had not only survived their cruelty, she had become stronger because of it. She lowered her gaze upon them, not with malice but with quiet, unyielding power. The chamber, once a prison of ice, now radiated warmth and light. Every frozen corner melted, every crack in the authority of the elders widened, and the village above would soon feel the ripple of a new era. Leone's heart had become unstoppable. The cold had failed. The flame had won. The warmth that Leone had carried through the frozen keep and into the council chamber spread outward like sunlight over snow, reaching every corner of the valley. Villagers who had once walked through life numb with rigid routine and fear now began to feel, truly feel, for the first time in decades. Hearts long trapped beneath layers of suppression stirred, beating faster, tender with emotion they thought forbidden. Children ran through the streets, laughing, crying, shouting, all at once, free from the invisible chains that had bound their joy. Parents embraced their offspring with tears, smoothing hair, brushing frost from cheeks, whispering apologies they had never thought to speak. It was chaos, yet it was life, a river of emotion finally allowed to flow. Families that had been fractured by decades of rules and fear reunited. Fathers who had been distant, mothers who had been hardened by the weight of tradition, hugged and wept, remembering the warmth they had once shared and longed to feel again. Grandparents reached out to grandchildren they had never spoken to with tenderness, apologizing for years of cold neglect. Memories buried beneath frost surfaced. First laughter, first cries, first tears of joy, all returning to the valley like a tide reclaiming the shore. Elder Kumo, standing at the edge of the village square, raised his hands, finally speaking aloud. The elders who had long ruled through fear and control watched silently, their authority crumbled, their rituals powerless. "We were wrong," Kumo said, his voice trembling but clear. "We built our power on fear, on the denial of what makes us human. We thought control would create strength, but it only created emptiness. Lena's heart has shown us the truth. Warmth is not weakness. Kindness is not danger. Feeling is life itself. The villagers paused to listen, the words sinking deep, softening hearts that had long been rigid. One by one, other elders lowered their heads, acknowledging their mistakes. Their silence, once a weapon, became a sign of reflection, remorse, and the beginning of change. Lena walked through the village streets, barefoot, radiant. Every step she took left traces of warmth in the cobblestones, softening them, turning ice to water, hardness to tenderness. Children ran to her side, their small hands brushing her robes, feeling the glow she carried. She smiled gently, not with triumph over others, but with the quiet knowledge that love and compassion could not be defeated. Neighbors began helping one another for the first time, offering food, sharing fires, holding each other against the cold that had lingered too long. Long-buried emotions, fear, grief, hope, joy, intertwined and grew together, forming bonds that could never be broken. The valley itself seemed to breathe differently, as if alive with the collective pulse of hundreds of awakened hearts. The frozen walls of the past melted, replaced by connection, empathy, and understanding. People wept for the time lost, but they also laughed at the life regained. They discovered a simple, profound truth. The warmth Lena carried was not hers alone. It was within everyone, waiting to be set free. And so, for the first time in generations, the valley truly learned to feel, embracing warmth, kindness, and community as a way of life. Lena stood at the edge of the valley, the rising sun spilling over the mountains, turning frost into pools of golden light. The village that had once been rigid, cold, and unfeeling now thrived with movement and warmth. Children ran barefoot through the thawed streets, their laughter echoing against walls that had once been rigid with ice. Women and men embraced freely, holding one another close, tears streaming down faces that had long been taught to hide emotion. Even the elders, once pillars of authority and suppression, now walked quietly among the villagers, humbled and changed, softened by the reality Lena had unleashed. Her own heart felt like a sun rising within her chest. Each beat radiated warmth so potent that anyone near her could feel it, a sensation both comforting and awe-inspiring. She had become the living embodiment of resilience, courage, and kindness, proof that even in a world built to suppress softness, a single act of vulnerability could ripple outward and reshape the lives of many. The valley had transformed. Where once the streets had been slick with ice and frost, now the cobblestones glimmered with dew, warmed by sunlight and the footprints of those who had dared to feel again. The market square, which had been silent under the oppressive weight of authority, now bustled with life. Merchants smiled and laughed as they sold bread and cloth, children chased one another in joyful games, and the scent of cooking fires mingled with the crisp mountain air. The frozen fountains had thawed, their streams flowing freely, reflecting the first real smiles the village had seen in decades. Everywhere Lena looked, she saw evidence of her tear's power. Where it had first fallen in the keep, a small patch of stone had been warmed enough to break through the ice, spreading through the hallways and into the valley below. That single, unassuming drop had become a symbol not just of resistance but of hope. People spoke of it in hushed reverence, pointing out where it had first melted the floor, where it had touched the hands of the children in the village, and where it had ultimately forced the elders to confront their own hearts. Elder Kumo approached her cautiously. Though he had seen the keep's collapse and the thawing of the village firsthand, he still seemed small and hesitant beside her radiant presence. "Lena," he said softly, "you have shown us what we lost, what we tried to bury beneath stone and cold. You have taught the valley to feel again. We are grateful. And sorry." Lena looked at him, her eyes reflecting the warmth that had reshaped their lives. "It is not I who healed this valley," she said. "It was the truth. The truth of what it means to feel, to care, to cry, and to love. I only carried it where no one else dared. You all have the power too." The council elders who had once ruled through fear and icy authority, now gathered around her, humbled. They admitted that the structures they had built, the frozen keep, the strict rules, the suppression of emotion, had not been a source of strength but a cage. Lena listened as they confessed, as tears mingled with words, and as promises were made to nurture the valley, rather than control it. She did not gloat, she only nodded, feeling a profound peace that came from witnessing real change. The villagers began to honor her in ways both subtle and grand. Mothers told their children the story of Lena's terror as they tucked them into warm blankets at night. Fathers spoke of her courage and her warmth in hushed tones, teaching their sons that compassion is never weakness. Artisans carved the image of a single shining tear into stones placed in the village square, a reminder of the strength that lies in honesty and vulnerability. Bards composed songs recounting her bravery, melodies that spread through the valleys like gentle rivers, carrying the legend of a young woman who had dared to feel when the world demanded she suppress every emotion. Leone herself walked among them quietly, letting the village bloom around her. She visited the schools where children once had learned discipline over creativity, encouraging them to explore not just knowledge but empathy, joy, and kindness. She helped mend homes that had suffered under years of frost, teaching villagers to cultivate warmth in their hearts and in their hearts alike. Every act she performed left a mark, not one of dominance or fear but of encouragement, teaching each person that strength and softness could coexist. Seasons changed. The harsh winters that once gripped the valley with an unforgiving hand now passed more gently. The village learned to adapt, to live with emotion as their guide rather than fear. Even in storms, warmth persisted, carried in the hearts of those Leone had touched. And every time someone experienced pain, disappointment, or loss, they remembered the story of the tear that had melted everything and taught them that even a single honest emotion could be more powerful than 1,000 frozen hearts. Generations grew up under the shadow of that story. Mothers spoke of Leone's courage while teaching children to cry freely, to hug without fear, and to care deeply for their neighbors. Fathers told of the frozen keep and the ice that could not contain a single living heart, emphasizing that warmth, love, and resilience were the truest measures of strength. Villagers learned that their emotions, once buried and feared, were not burdens but gifts, capable of reshaping lives and communities. The image of Leone's tear became a permanent fixture in the village square, carved into stone with intricate designs surrounding it. The stone glowed faintly in sunlight, reflecting the enduring warmth she had brought. Pilgrims from distant valleys came to see it, inspired by the tale of a young woman whose single tear had undone oppression, thawed hearts, and restored life. They left with a renewed sense of hope, carrying the story with them to their own villages, where the message spread like wildfire. One honest tear, one act of courage, one refusal to suppress emotion, can ignite a revolution of warmth that no cruelty can ever freeze. In the evening, as Leone stood on a hill overlooking the valley, she felt the wind carry the laughter, tears, and whispers of the people below. Her chest swelled with quiet pride, not for herself but for the lives now unbound by fear. Her heart, once targeted for suppression, had become the pulse of the valley itself. She realized that she was no longer merely a girl who had endured cruelty. She had become a symbol, a living legend, and a reminder that even the smallest act of genuine feeling could reshape the world. And as the sun set, painting the sky in golds and pinks, Leone smiled, knowing that the warmth she had carried would live on far beyond her lifetime. The valley, once frozen in fear and suppression, now thrived with laughter, tears, and unyielding love. The story of her tear, the single, honest, defiant drop that melted everything, would echo for generations. The villagers learned the greatest lesson of all. One honest tear carries more power than 1,000 frozen hearts. And Leone? She became the woman with the melted tear, immortalized not in stone alone, but in every heart she had touched, every soul she had freed, and every life transformed by the courage to feel.